I was looking for whiskey to start this review, but I'm ashamed to admit, as a self-respecting Irishman, I really should have whiskey in the house, but I don't. So I'm having beer instead. Red Rising, Red Rising, Red Rising. Everybody's talking about Red Rising. These books are everywhere. Everybody has an opinion. But I'm finally doing this video because I read the first trilogy, Red Rising, Golden Sun and Morning Star, and I loved them. I think I loved aspects of these books more than even people who love them a lot. And Yolanda convinced me that maybe some of the things that I got out of these books, not a lot of people have talked about. So that's what I'm going to do. If you watched our August wrap-up, some of these thoughts were in there, but I'm just going to elaborate on them a little bit more in this video and go book to book and talk about what I thought about the trilogy before I get into Iron Gold, Dark Age and Light Space Bringer. So yeah, stick around for the video. I may have other thoughts that all the other tens of millions of review videos about Red Rising maybe don't have, but I also agree with everybody else's thoughts that this is a page-turning, rip-roaring, emotionally scarring, keeps you up at night type of series. But it doesn't lack for depth, it doesn't lack for great characters, and it certainly doesn't lack for some thematic exploration. Anyway, let's get into it. For those of you who are stumbling upon this video, or who maybe even subscribe to the channel and don't know what Red Rising is, I'll give you the general pitch. What is basically, I think, like 1,000 years in the future, something like that. Humanity has colonized the solar system. They have terraformed many of the planets and the asteroid belt, and they live on the various planets and moons around the solar system. And society is basically classified or stratified into various colors. Now, I don't remember all of the colors. I never really remember all of the colors, but each color represents a certain type of person in society, or a certain profession, or just a certain class. And what happens in this book, or in these books essentially, is that the golds are the supreme sort of natural selection imperial Nazi types that feel that they are the peak of human evolution now that humans have expanded into the solar system and colonized it. They're the colonizers. And the Reds are the subjugated workers, the miners. They're smaller in stature, and there's sort of a twist in the first book that I won't get into, and then obviously I won't go into too many plot details. I'll try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. But that's the general gist, and obviously by the title Red Rising, you know, rebellion will happen and they'll want to overthrow the empire and that kind of thing. So the setup is very, very similar to a lot of dystopian fiction and maybe even a lot of YA fiction that has sprang up post Harry Potter and Hunger Games, etc., etc. There are some nods in these books to Ender's Game and Dune and Book of the New Sun. There were very obvious references to classic sci-fi works, even in some of the naming schemes of some of the moons or some of the stations, and I liked all of that stuff. But that just shows that at least early on in these books, Pierce Brown wears his influences quite on his sleeve, and I think that's the most common criticism of the first book, Red Rising, which basically, which I think it says on the front of the book, Ender, Katniss, and now Darrow. So Darrow is the main character. He is a Red. He is a miner on Mars who learns that the society that he has grown up in is not everything that it seems to be, or everything that he has learned it to be. The Golds are sort of treated as kind of these untouchable godlike figures, and that notion, that idea starts to break down. And the first book is set up in this, Hunger Gamesy type of thing where he's sent to an institute. He has to learn the ways of Golds, and the setup is very, very familiar and quite tropey and cliched. But the common thing that readers and fans of the series will tell you is just get past the first book. Now, I agree in a way, but I also take issue with that in a sense that I don't think the first book is bad. I think it's quite good, actually, and I think it uses those tropes quite well. And if we compare something like what Red Rising is to the endless swathe of traditional fantasy books and fantasy books that have a very familiar setup, but also do it quite well. There are ones that don't do it quite well, and there are others that do it quite well. I think this is the science fiction space opera equivalent that does that well. And I also think that Pierce Brown's writing style kind of doesn't get enough credit, and this starts in Red Rising. He has this punchy attitude to the writing that very much gives Darrow a voice. It's narrated in the first person, and even some of the language and the slang that he uses is very Irish, and that just spoke to me. And then some of the slang and the language that he gives to distinguish the different colours and the different people within certain strata of society is very good, and it's not just used as a gimmick in Red Rising. Specifically, there is one scene that the use of slang from a different strata of society might give away certain things about who people really are, and I just thought that was quite clever, and the writing style really just gave a vivid personality to the characters in the book, and this is his big strength. His characters are amazing, and at the beginning they might present themselves in a certain way that might seem cliched, or what kind of character this is going to be, or this guy is going to be the pompous villain and he might surprise you with the journeys that some of the characters go on. And for long-time readers who may be watching this video, just again, I haven't read Iron Gold and Dark Age, and I know that things evolve even more from everything that I've seen, read, and from everything that Yolanda has said. But his characters really do shine, and I find most of them immediately endearing, or at least immediately engaging, or immediately interesting. You don't have to like all of the characters, but I think all of them are interesting enough to carry a compelling story, and you just want to know what happens to them. And not only are his characters really, really good, but the story is damn good. Red Rising sure is a little cliched, so the first book is obviously they go to this institute and it's kind of this Hunger Games-esque battle royale thing that might appeal to fans of like Fortnite or whatever. And I gotta say, that was the section of the first book that I liked the least. But there are certain bits of dialogue in that first book that really pepper in what these books are about to me. And then moving to Golden Sun is where this really hits its stride. It gets a lot more action-packed. We move out of the Institute setting and we're in the world, in the galaxy now. We're in the solar system. And we're figuring out the political machinations and the political landscape of how this rebellion is going from all sides. And the big thing about Golden Sun is just the pacing. And it's the thing that everybody will tell you if you're looking at trying these books. It's the thing that a lot of people will say, is that these books are relentlessly fast-paced. And some say that that begins in Golden Sun, but I think that begins in Red Rising. Red Rising is very, very well paced. It slows down a little bit in the Institute, but it's the characters pull you through that story. And in Golden Sun, it really does. He ratchets up the action especially, but he doesn't ever neglect the interesting conversation and the interesting dialogue. And some of the theme work that he's really going for starts to appear in earnest in Golden Sun. One of my favourite scenes is the sort of gala dinner where Darrow confronts Cassius, and that scene is just so cool. And there are a lot of scenes that are just really, really cool. The setup of the series can come across as quite silly and maybe a little juvenile on surface level of like, I'm just going to throw all this cool shit together in one thing. But that's the thing, it is fucking cool. And he knows how to construct a scene or a chapter that you can tell something is coming, some kind of revelation, or not necessarily plot twist as in cheap plot twist, we're gonna grab you in this sort of lazy way, but there is something going to happen at the end of this chapter that will further inform what you've read up to that point, develop some character in some vital way, or will be an event that sets an inevitable chain reaction or set of consequences that will continue to be, that will be dealt with later. And that's the thing, everything that happens in these books creates consequences that the characters have to deal with later, and we don't ignore them, and people die, and it doesn't just, okay, moving on to the next plot point now, like a lot of space opera or, you know, adventure science fiction might do. But also the rich examination then of the cost of rebellion and the cost of being a person who is leading a rebellion that might even be with all of the best intentions, but it still has a cost. It still has to come at the price of a sliver of your humanity, because they are inevitably violent things. And I don't think Pierce Brown shies away from that as a theme either in these books. And that is where Morning Star kind of becomes, or became, my favourite of the three so far. Is that's where I found that discussion, that rich theme work, where you've done all these action-y things with these characters and you've gone through hell and back with them, and then in Morning Star that all continues, but you get these rich scenes of dialogue that really examine what it is we're actually doing and what will come in the future as a consequence of all of this. And the big thing that I kind of wanted to mention in this video, I'm not going to go too in depth about the stories themselves or the plot points or this character and that character. It's kind of been said 1,000 times in other videos, in better videos, I'm sure. But the thing I really want to talk about, and the thing that it really got to me in Morning Star, and I think at the end of Golden Sun, so the end of Golden Sun, Darrow goes back to visit his mother. That's all I will say in terms of spoilers. I don't want to say too much more, but he goes back and visits his mother, and there is a conversation and a scene there that really hit me. And then in Morning Star, the theme around who Darrow is kind of struck me on a personal level, and I didn't necessarily realize it till I sat down to talk about the books in our August wrap-up. And it's this cultural duality that Darrow now has. Minor plot spoiler, I guess, for Red Rising is Darrow has to become a gold. He is Captain America super serumed into a gold to infiltrate the golds and lead a Red Rising from within. But obviously, throughout the series, Darrow spends many, many years as a gold. He learns to love people who are golds. and assimilates into that culture. And he's still a red at heart, but he reaches this point at the end of Golden Sun and in Morning Star where he is no longer red enough for the reds, and he is not gold enough for the golds, and he will never be enough for either side of his family now, you know? And this hit me in a really strong way because that's kind of me. And even just the small insignificant details of like Pierce Brown having based the Reds off Irish people, there's a real cultural sense to the personalities of the Reds that the slang, as I said, is very Irish, and he said this was very intentional. Even the guy that narrates the audiobooks is from Dublin, and it just these little personal touches that have kind of attached me to these books now on a much deeper level than I ever anticipated before going in. And I think verbalizing the internal struggle that Darrow goes through to figure out, am I enough of a gold? Am I enough of a red? Where is it I actually belong? Does it actually matter? What does it mean? Is it just a cool thing that I am both? And for me, throughout my life, this has been a constant question of, am I Irish enough for Irish people? Am I Spanish enough for Spanish people? And obviously on BookTube, most of our videos we do in English, so all of you guys know me as an Irish person, but I consider myself to be equally both. And like, I have a strong accent in English, I have a strong accent in Spanish, a regional accent in both languages, and my personality might shift depending on what language I'm speaking. And this happens to Darrow, and he notices it when he goes back to visit his mother. He knows that he is kind of a different person now that he is a gold and he's interacting with golds, and there are things about gold society that are good and that he doesn't want to fight against. But he is also still that red. He is that subjugated minor, working class person who is on the ground and working as the Robin Hood figure of the people. And these ideas as well about not everybody in the empire is a bad person or is inherently bad because of the things that they believe in, or the things they believe in being inherently bad. These interesting questions, like characters such as Cassius or Roke, who are fascinating characters, and I don't think Pierce Brown gets enough credit for doing this, but creating these complex characters who may be seen as villains possibly, but aren't really. They're just products of the places that they were raised in. And I see this in my daily life, that there are certain very, very small, almost imperceptible attitude things or perceptions or ideas about a certain thing that might be associated with being a former colonial empire. My Spanish family, obviously Spain and Ireland, on the colonial spectrum, being on opposite sides of that. Ireland is a former colony. There is a personality, there is a culture, there is a psychology to the people in Ireland that is directly tied to that history, and there is a psychology and a notion about patriotism and being proud of your heritage that is associated with Spain, but that history of being a colonizer or a former power, superpower in the world. And those things, while not necessarily being very overt all the time, come out in very small ways. And I live this. And I don't know if Pierce Brown has that in his own heritage, but the way he writes certain characters and their dialogue in these books absolutely nails that. And it's amazing, and it really, really spoke to me on a deep level. To the point where, yeah, these books are probably some of my favourites now, I think. Which I guess, you know, a lot of people are saying that in their reviews. It's a very hyped up series, But I think just for that reason alone, and also the fact that, you know, they are rip-roaring page-turners. Like, you cannot put these books down. They are... This is solid storytelling. But that extra little personal touch, I think, is what sets these books aside or ahead of others now for me. That kind of theme work really starts to hit home in Morning Star. So Morning Star is my favourite. Now, there is a plot point later on in Morning Star that a lot of people seem to have an issue with, and I absolutely acknowledge that certain twist, that thing. And there's maybe an issue with Pierce Brown being a new writer dealing with the first person perspective and, you know, withholding information from the reader, even though it's something that the narrator knows but decides not to tell the reader. That is absolutely a criticism that I have of Morning Star. But everything else that I mentioned completely outweighed that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I know what's going to happen here. I'm trying to talk around the spoiler. I was reading it going, oh, I know what's going to happen here. I know what he's doing. But it's fine because he was just hitting on a personal level. So I didn't mind. But there is that one thing at the end of Morning Star that I'm sure if you get there or if you've read it, you know. But anyway, these books are really, really good. I just wanted to make this little video to kind of have this as like a bridge before I start the sequel trilogy, or well, there will be a 7th book, Red God. And I obviously promised Yolanda that I would continue these books because I'd only read the first one, and she won't shut up talking about the rest of them. So this is just sort of where I'm at now with Red Rising, what I thought of these books. Very, very briefly. I don't want to go through all of the stuff that I'm sure all the other videos will have said already. This series was brought to my attention originally like 2 or 3 years ago from Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews. He did a Why You Should Read Red Rising. That really sold me on it. I bought the books back then, and then Yolanda read them first, and now finally I've gotten around to them. I couldn't be more grateful to Mike for that video, and then obviously everybody else who has read the books since then. And all of the little nods to other sci-fi books, just again, it shows kind of that Pierce Brown is into all of the same things that I'm into. So everything that he finds cool, I just find cool. So it just clicks. The Roman history, the nods to science fiction books, like I said, there are certain things, you know, like there are moons or stations called Hyperion and Endymion, which is very overt. Like I said, he wears his influences on his sleeve, and the nods to other works in science fiction and fantasy are very, very obvious if you are aware of them. Severo, for example, is a character, one of my favourite characters, and he's named after Severian from the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. And yeah, it's just, these are cool books. They're books written for fans of science fiction and fantasy, who just love great characters and page turning storytelling. I don't really have that many criticisms of the books. In retrospect, Red Rising is probably even better than I thought it was at the beginning, and I'm one of the people who I don't think I criticize that book that much. So Red Rising is a seriously good series. And I'm looking forward to getting to Iron Gold. I'm looking forward to getting to Dark Age and Light Space Bringer. So anybody who is subscribed to the channel and you've read these books, let me know what you thought of them down in the comments. If you have just arrived to this channel, consider subscribing. I'll be getting to the rest of these books very, very soon. Right now we're doing the month of Jimmy, so I'm reading a bunch of books recommended by Jimmy from the Fantasy Network YouTube channel. Go subscribe to him if you aren't subscribed to him. And then next month I'll probably get more into Iron Gold and continue on with these books, and we'll see where we are then at the end of October or November and I might make another video wrapping up the whole series. So if you like this video, like it. If you dislike it, feel free to dislike. Jump down into the comments, let me know what you think of my thoughts. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. And subscribe if you feel like subscribing. And I'll see you guys next time, maybe with more Red Rising stuff.